I give the floor now to His Excellency Vivian Balakrishnan, Minister of the Foreign Affairs of Singapore. Excellency, the floor is yours.
President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it's a bright and sunny Saturday morning outside. I thank you for your sacrifice of time to participate in this debate. I add my voice to congratulate Her Excellency Maria Fernanda Espinosa of Ecuador on her election as President of the 73rd session of the General Assembly. I also thank my good friend, the Miroslav Lajčák, the Foreign Minister of Slovakia, for his sterling leadership of the 72nd session. The single word we have probably heard the most over the last week is multilateralism. Multilateralism is at a crossroads and, in fact, is facing a significant threat. In recent years, we have witnessed a crisis of confidence in the concept of multilateralism and its institutions. Whether in trade, security, dispute resolution, questions have arisen about whether the multilateral system can continue to deliver effective solutions to all the multitude of problems that we face as a world. I stand here as a representative of a tiny, open, trade-dependent city-state. And Singapore has witnessed this retreat from multilateralism with grave concern. And that's why today I want to raise my voice in defense of multilateralism. There is perhaps no better forum for me to do so than at the UN, the ultimate bastion of multilateralism. It is actually easy to understand why there is a resurgence of isolationist, protectionist, and even xenophobic sentiments in the political arena all over the world. We live in uncertain, volatile, disruptive times. The digital revolution is increasingly disrupting the way we live, work, play, communicate, organize, mobilize our societies. Non-state actors and transboundary threats, terrorism, pandemics, climate change remain a clear and present danger. And frontier issues like artificial intelligence and cybercrime have leapt from the pages of science fiction into our daily lives. And our social cohesion is breaking down. And all too often, we operate in isolated social and political bubbles. At the same time, the international order as we know it is being disrupted. Since 1945, many countries and regions have benefited from the open and global system, a world order that was substantially underwritten by a single power, the United States of America. But today we are transitioning into a multipolar world where other powers are quite rightly beginning to assume a greater role in multiple spheres. And this is a transition that needs to be managed carefully, delicately. I'm not saying that multilateralism is perfect. In fact, we recognize that it hasn't always fulfilled all its promises, and quite frankly, sometimes it has been oversold as a panacea. The question then is, how do we make multilateralism work in this rapidly shifting geostrategic context? My take is that every state has to make room to accommodate these new realities and find a new modus vivendi. Foreign policy and trade policy actually always begin at home. Politics is always local. And we need to achieve this rebalancing in our domestic societies and political sphere as well as make a rebalancing in the global international sphere. The global order will need to evolve, our responsibilities will need to be rebalanced, and in this perilous period of transition, we cannot and we should not abandon the rules-based world order that has brought unprecedented peace and prosperity for 70 years. In fact, the scale and the transboundary nature of the challenges that we face today demand more cohesion and more cooperation, not less. There is a strong case to be made for doubling down on multilateralism rather than retreating from it. We need a clear framework of rules and norms to ensure predictability and stability in interstate relations and commerce. Defining these rules through a multilateral process in which all states engage with one another as equals is essential for us to build a consensus and to strengthen respect for the rule of law. Compliance with agreed rules by all states is not only essential for global stability and for governing the global commons, but is especially crucial for a small city-state like Singapore. The principle that agreements will be respected and will be implemented is fundamental for our survival. Without the rule of international law, the strong will do what they will, and the weak will suffer what we must. For small states like Singapore, we cannot survive in such a world. And that is why Singapore has always been a staunch defender of the United Nations, of international law, and the multilateral system. Let's take trade, for example. Globalization actually has not benefited everyone equally. There remain pockets of poverty and hunger in our world. Our people are worried about jobs, and unfortunately, the conventional arguments in favor of free trade, economic integration, and cooperation between countries, these arguments have gone out of fashion. Today, trade frictions between the United States and China have raised the specter of a trade war. But we cannot simply blame globalization. All governments of the day have an obligation to consider the long-term and sustainable solutions, instead of reflexively raising trade barriers. For example, to truly address the anxieties over widening inequality and wage stagnation, we must address the root causes. In the midst of the digital revolution, we must ensure that our people have the right skills for new emerging jobs. It is futile to fight to protect obsolete technologies and to squabble over yesterday's jobs. On the contrary, we need to try to take advantage of the new opportunities of the global market and the jobs of the future. It is thus our responsibility as governments to actively put in place policies to train, retrain, retool, and reskill our citizens. We need to invest and reinvest in infrastructure, training, and education. And that is why in Singapore, we are working so hard to restructure our education system. We are putting in serious money to enable our people to continuously upgrade and learn new skills through a program which we call Skills Future. The emphasis is on the word future. And our focus in Singapore right now is on restructuring our economy, to identify and work with the private sector, to transform jobs, to enhance our competitiveness, and to elevate productivity across the board. This is fundamentally an investment in our people to make sure that all of us are ready for the future. Ultimately, no country benefits from trade conflicts and protectionism. The negative impacts will ripple through the global supply chain and will undermine growth and prosperity in all countries. We will all be worse off. At this time of increasing interconnectedness and interdependence, now more than ever before, we need a multilateral approach, and we need strong rules. Singapore will continue to be a strong and staunch supporter of the rules-based multilateral system, and the critical importance of the World Trade Organization cannot be overemphasized. It is the ultimate neutral arbiter of international trade disputes. Another area where we need to urgently promote the adoption and implementation of rules and norms is in cyberspace. To reap the full benefits of the digital revolution, we must develop a trusted and open and inclusive cyberspace underpinned by international law and well-defined norms of responsible state behavior. The International Telecommunications Union ranked Singapore as the country most committed to cybersecurity in 2017. Yet, in July this year, we discovered that one of Singapore's major health databases was subject to an advanced, persistent threat. This was a deliberate, targeted, sophisticated cyber attack. No country is immune from these attacks. But all of us need to work together. We need to implement the norms and rules that will prohibit such attacks on critical infrastructure, particularly where lives are at stake. And as the only universal, inclusive, multilateral forum, states have always turned to the United Nations to develop the rules that govern the global commons. To take the example of the global commons, consider the United Nations Convention of the Law of the Sea. It provides a global legal framework for all activities in the oceans and the seas, which we depend on for trade, for food, for resources. Just as Singapore strongly supported UNCLOS, the process behind the Convention for the Law of the Sea, Singapore stands ready to contribute to the United Nations work to develop and adopt norms and rules on cybersecurity. This is simply another example of the global commons, and we cannot allow the tragedy of the commons to occur in cyberspace, in the sea, or in the area of climate change. To this end, we support the reconvening of the United Nations Group of Government Experts and the continuation of its work in developing the norms of state behavior in cyberspace. Cybersecurity has been a priority for Singapore's chairmanship of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. At the third ASEAN Ministerial Conference on Cybersecurity, which was held in Singapore just last week, all 10 ASEAN member states agreed to subscribe in principle to the 11 norms contained in the UN GGE 2015 report. Singapore is also committed to capacity building, which we feel is essential for states to effectively implement the rules and norms of state behavior. Singapore will launch an ASEAN Singapore Cybersecurity Center of Excellence in 2019. We have also partnered with the United Nations Office for Disarmament Affairs on a UN Singapore cyber program that will raise awareness and build capacity in our region. Our work in ASEAN is rooted in our belief that regional organizations can demonstrate how multilateralism continues to be relevant and beneficial for people all over the world. As the chair of ASEAN this year, Singapore will continue to work with all our member states and our external partners to ensure that our regional architecture remains open, inclusive, and rules-based. We are working with our partners to conclude the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. When this is concluded, the RCEP will be the world's largest trading bloc, accounting for up to a third of global GDP. But this is not really just about citing big trade figures. This is also an effort to send a powerful message that ASEAN member states and our 6 partners, India, China, Japan, Korea, Australia, New Zealand, that we stand and are committed to free trade, regional integration, and international cooperation. ASEAN member states are also working together to leverage the digital revolution for our people's benefits. We established the ASEAN Smart Cities Network at the 32nd ASEAN Summit in April this year. This Smart Cities Network focuses on ensuring interoperability and integration of services and allows cities in our region to share experiences, exchange solutions, and the lessons learned. We have just concluded an ASEAN agreement on streamlining e-commerce within Southeast Asia so that our businesses can market and sell their products easily and conveniently and seamlessly across Southeast Asia. ASEAN member states are also committed to the peaceful resolution of disputes and to do so through a multilateral process. Let me now address my friends in Myanmar and particularly the situation in the Rakhine State. This is a matter of grave concern. The crisis is a complex, deep-rooted, intercommunal conflict which has its roots over centuries. More recently, we have read harrowing accounts of brutal and shocking atrocities. We have to condemn all human rights violations, the threats, the loss of life, and the violence inflicted on defenseless people. We expect the Independent Commission of Inquiry, established by the government of Myanmar, to carry out impartial investigations and to hold those responsible fully accountable. We also hope that the voluntary return of refugees back to Myanmar in a safe, secure, and dignified way will commence soon without undue delay. But ultimately, a political solution needs to be found. A solution and a process that will involve reconciliation, fairness, justice, and better prospects for all communities. Only then can we achieve a durable solution to this complex, long-standing problem. And all the members of ASEAN stand ready to support and assist Myanmar in this very challenging, difficult situation. We have also been watching, not far from our region, the developments on the Korean Peninsula. This year, Singapore was able to make a small contribution towards easing tensions by hosting the summit between the United States and the DPRK leaders in June. This summit, as well as the 3 inter-Korean dialogues which have been held this year, are important steps towards lasting peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula. Singapore hopes that the dialogue and the efforts and hopes that the reservoir of trust that is being built up will bring peace ultimately to this troubled part of Asia. So let me conclude, Excellencies, by saying that there is no doubt that multilateralism needs to be defended and that the UN itself needs to be strengthened. That's the only way we're going to deal with the complex global challenges of the future. As member states of the UN, each of us has a responsibility to work together to improve and adapt the multilateral systems that we have built painstakingly over 7 decades. We need to find solutions, we need to build consensus so that our people can lead better, more secure, and more peaceful lives. And ultimately, a rules-based multilateral system is absolutely indispensable to secure peace and prosperity for people at home on this one planet that we call Earth. Thank you all very much for your attention.
I thank the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Singapore for his statement.